Surgeon comforted the old lady, until she called him by a name no one else knew. This is a story of mystery, compassion, and the incredible ways our past can reach into our present when we least expect it. If you enjoy stories that make you think about the deeper connections in life, please give this video a like and let us know in the comments how this story made you feel. Now let's begin our journey. Dr. Samuel Chen adjusted his surgical mask as he walked through the sterile corridors of Metropolitan General Hospital. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his tired face, revealing the exhaustion that came from working consecutive 12-hour shifts. At 42 years old, Samuel had dedicated his entire adult life to medicine, earning a reputation as one of the most skilled cardiovascular surgeons on the West Coast. His colleagues respected him, his patients trusted him, and his success rate was among the highest in the hospital. Yet tonight, as he made his rounds through the cardiac intensive care unit, something felt different. The hospital was quieter than usual for a Tuesday evening. Most of the day shift had gone home, leaving behind the skeleton crew that kept the medical center running through the night. Samuel's footsteps echoed softly against the polished linoleum floors as he checked his watch. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and he had just finished a complex bypass surgery that had taken over 6 hours to complete. The patient, a 60-year-old construction worker named Marcus, was now stable and recovering well. Samuel felt the familiar satisfaction that came with saving a life. But beneath that satisfaction was a weariness that seemed to grow deeper with each passing year. As he approached the nurse's station, Nurse Patricia Williams looked up from her computer screen. Patricia had worked at Metropolitan General for over 20 years, and she knew Samuel better than most. She could read the exhaustion in his dark eyes and the slight slump in his usually perfect posture. "Dr. Chen, there's a new admission in room 312, Patricia said, her voice gentle but professional. "Elderly woman, came in about an hour ago with chest pains. Dr. Martinez did the initial assessment, but he's requested that you take a look at her. Her name is Eleanor Whitmore, 83 years old." Samuel nodded, accepting the patient file that Patricia handed him. He flipped through the pages, scanning the medical history and test results. Eleanor Whitmore had been brought in by ambulance after collapsing at her apartment. The paramedics found her conscious but disoriented, complaining of severe chest pain and shortness of breath. Her preliminary tests showed some irregularities in her heart rhythm, but nothing immediately life-threatening. "Has she had any visitors?" Samuel asked, still reading through the file. "No, sir. She lives alone, and according to the paramedics, there was no emergency contact information. She seems to be quite independent for her age, but also quite alone." Samuel felt a familiar pang in his chest. Throughout his career, he had encountered many elderly patients who had outlived their families and friends, facing their medical crises in solitude. It was one of the aspects of his job that affected him most deeply, though he had learned to maintain his professional composure. "I'll go see her now," Samuel said, closing the file. "Has she been given anything for the pain?" "Mild sedative and some pain medication, but she's still quite alert. She's been asking for a doctor, actually. Seems anxious to talk to someone." Samuel made his way down the hallway to room 312. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see a small figure lying in the hospital bed, bathed in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. He knocked gently on the door frame before entering. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Dr. Chen. I'm a cardiologist here at the hospital. I'd like to examine you and discuss your condition." The elderly woman turned her head toward him, and Samuel was struck by her remarkably clear blue eyes. Despite her age and current condition, there was an alertness and intelligence in her gaze that was immediately apparent. Her silver hair was neatly arranged despite her recent medical emergency, and she wore a simple but elegant nightgown that suggested she had been well cared for before her arrival at the hospital. "Dr. Chen," she repeated, her voice surprisingly strong for someone her age. "Thank you for coming to see me. I've been hoping to speak with a doctor. These chest pains have been quite frightening." Samuel approached her bedside, pulling up a chair. He had learned over the years that elderly patients often responded better when he sat down rather than standing over them. It made the interaction feel more personal and less intimidating. "I can imagine how frightening that must have been," Samuel said, his voice gentle and reassuring. "Can you tell me when you first noticed the pain? Was it sudden or did it come on gradually?" Eleanor's eyes focused on his face as she began to describe her symptoms. "It started this afternoon while I was reading in my favorite chair. At first, I thought it might be indigestion from lunch, but then it became much worse. The pain was like nothing I've ever experienced before, and I couldn't catch my breath." As she spoke, Samuel noticed something in her expression that he couldn't quite identify. There was a familiarity in the way she looked at him, as if she recognized him from somewhere. But Samuel was certain he had never met Eleanor Whitmore before tonight. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to listen to your heart and lungs now," Samuel said, reaching for his stethoscope. "Just try to breathe normally for me." As he leaned forward to place the stethoscope on her chest, Eleanor's hand suddenly reached up and gently touched his arm. The gesture was tender and familiar, like something a grandmother might do with a beloved grandchild. "You have kind eyes, Dr. Chen," she said softly. "They remind me of someone I used to know, someone very special to me." Samuel paused, stethoscope in hand, and looked into her eyes. There was something about the way she spoke, the tenderness in her voice, that made him feel unexpectedly emotional. He had dealt with thousands of patients over the years, but something about Eleanor Whitmore was different. "Thank you," he said simply, and proceeded with his examination. Her heartbeat was irregular but not dangerously so, and her lungs were clear. The test would provide more detailed information, but his initial assessment suggested that while her condition required monitoring, it was not immediately critical. As he completed his examination, Eleanor continued to watch him with those penetrating, blue eyes. "Dr. Chen, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. Do you have family, children?" The question caught Samuel off guard. He was accustomed to keeping his personal life separate from his professional duties, but something about Eleanor's gentle demeanor made him want to answer honestly. "No, I don't have children," he said quietly. "I've been so focused on my career that I never found the time for a family of my own." Eleanor nodded slowly, and Samuel thought he saw a flicker of sadness cross her features. "That's a shame," she said. "You would have made a wonderful father. I can tell." The comment touched something deep within Samuel, a longing he had pushed aside for years in favor of his medical career. He cleared his throat and returned to his professional demeanor. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to order some additional tests for you. We'll monitor your heart rhythm overnight, and I'll check on you again in the morning. Try to get some rest." He stood to leave. Eleanor reached out and gently grasped his hand. Her touch was warm and comforting, and Samuel found himself reluctant to pull away. "Thank you, Dr. Chen. You have a healing touch, just like—" She paused as if catching herself before saying something she shouldn't. "Just like the best doctors do." Samuel squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mrs. Whitmore. Sleep well." As he left the room, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with Eleanor Whitmore was somehow significant. There had been something in her eyes, something in the way she spoke to him, that felt deeply familiar, but he was certain he had never met her before tonight. Walking back to the nurse's station, Samuel found himself thinking about Eleanor's question about children. It was a topic he rarely allowed himself to contemplate, but her gentle inquiry had brought it to the surface. At 42, he was successful and respected, but he was also profoundly alone. He had acquaintances and colleagues, but no one who truly knew him. No one who would worry if he didn't come home at night. "How did it go with Mrs. Whitmore?" Patricia asked as he approached the desk. "She's stable for now. I've ordered continuous monitoring and some additional tests. There's something about her—" Samuel paused, trying to find the right words. "She seems familiar somehow, but I know I've never treated her before." Patricia nodded knowingly. "Sometimes patients remind us of people from our past. It's not uncommon. especially when you've been doing this as long as you have. Samuel nodded, but he wasn't entirely convinced that was what he was experiencing. As he completed his rounds and prepared to head home, he found his thoughts returning. To Eleanor Whitmore. There had been something in her eyes, something in the way she had touched his arm, that spoke of a connection deeper than the typical doctor-patient relationship. Later that night, as Samuel lay in his empty apartment, he found himself unable to sleep. The image of Eleanor's clear blue eyes haunted him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting was more than mere coincidence. Somewhere in the depths of his memory, something was stirring, trying to surface. But no matter how hard, he tried to grasp it. The memory remained just out of reach, like a dream upon waking. Tomorrow he would see Eleanor again, and perhaps then he would understand why this elderly woman had affected him so profoundly. Little did Samuel know that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined, and that Eleanor Whitmore held secrets that would unlock a past he had spent decades trying to forget. The next morning arrived with the familiar chaos of a busy hospital. Dr. Samuel Chen had managed only a few hours of restless sleep before his alarm pulled him back to Metropolitan General. As he drove through the early morning traffic, his thoughts kept drifting back to Eleanor Whitmore. There had been something unsettling about their interaction, something that had left him feeling exposed and vulnerable in ways he hadn't experienced in years. Samuel arrived at the hospital just after 6:30, his usual time for beginning morning rounds. The cardiac unit was already bustling with activity as the night shift prepared to hand over their patients to the day team. He stopped at the nurses' station to review the overnight reports, scanning through the updates on his various patients. Dr. Chen called out Nurse Jennifer Martinez, Patricia's colleague on the day shift. Mrs. Whitmore in 312 had a good night. Her heart rhythm stabilized around 3 a.m., and she's been sleeping peacefully since then. Her latest EKG shows significant improvement from yesterday evening. Samuel nodded, feeling relieved. That's good news. Has she been awake this morning? She woke up about an hour ago and asked specifically for you. She seemed quite insistent that she needed to speak with you as soon as you arrived. She's had some breakfast and appears to be in good spirits. Something in Jennifer's tone caught Samuel's attention. Is there something else? Jennifer hesitated for a moment, then lowered her voice. It might be nothing, Dr. Chen, but while I was checking her vitals this morning, she mentioned something about having known a doctor years ago. She said he had the same gentle manner that you do. When I asked her about it, she became quite emotional and said she had lost touch with someone very important to her many years ago. Samuel felt that familiar stirring in his chest, the same unsettled feeling he had experienced the night before. Did she say anything else about this doctor? No. Sir? She just looked very sad for a moment, then asked again when you would be coming to see her. I got the impression that talking to you was very important to her. Samuel thanked Jennifer and made his way toward Eleanor's room. As he walked down the hallway, he found himself trying to piece together why this elderly woman seemed so familiar to him. He had an excellent memory for faces and names, a skill that had served him well throughout his medical career. Yet he was certain he had never met Eleanor Whitmore before yesterday evening. He knocked gently on her door before entering. Eleanor was sitting up in bed, looking significantly better than she had the night before. Her color had improved, and there was a brightness in her eyes that hadn't been there during his previous visit. She was holding a small worn photograph in her hands, which she quickly tucked into the drawer of her bedside table when she saw him. Dr. Chen, she said, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed to transform her entire appearance. I'm so glad you're here. I was hoping we could talk. Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm pleased to see you looking so much better. How are you feeling? Much better, thank you. The nurses have been wonderful, and that terrible pain in my chest is almost completely gone. She patted the bed beside her. Please sit down. I know you must be very busy, but I was hoping you might have a few minutes to talk with me. Samuel pulled up the same chair he had used the previous evening and settled beside her bed. Something about Eleanor's demeanor had changed overnight. While she had been alert and engaging during their first meeting, now she seemed almost eager, as if she had something important to share with him. "I'm glad you're feeling better," Samuel said. "Your test results show significant improvement. Your heart rhythm has stabilized, and your other vital signs are all within normal ranges. If you continue to improve at this rate, we should be able to discharge you in a day or two." Eleanor nodded, but Samuel could see that her mind was elsewhere. She kept glancing at the bedside drawer where she had placed the photograph, and there was a nervous energy about her that hadn't been present the night before. "Dr. Chen, may I ask you something?" she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "Of course. Last night when you told me you didn't have children, it made me very sad. You see, I once knew someone who would have been about your age now, and I often wondered what became of him. I wondered if he ever had a family, if he was happy, if he found success in life." Samuel felt his pulse quicken slightly. There was something in Eleanor's tone that suggested this wasn't merely casual conversation. "Someone you knew well?" "Very well," Eleanor said softly. "Someone I loved very much, actually. Someone I had to say goodbye to when he was very young, and I've regretted it every day since." The words hung in the air between them, and Samuel found himself leaning forward slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore, why are you telling me this?" Eleanor reached into the bedside drawer and withdrew the photograph she had been holding when he entered. It was old and faded, with the sepia tones of pictures taken decades ago. She held it carefully, as if it were made of the most delicate glass. "Dr. Chen, I know this might sound strange, but when I look at you, I see someone I once knew. Someone who was very precious to me." She paused, studying his face intently. "Would you mind if I asked about your childhood? About your family, the Boer?" Question caught Samuel completely off guard. In all his years of medical practice, no patient had ever inquired so directly about his personal history. His first instinct was to deflect, to maintain the professional boundaries that had always served him well. But something about Eleanor's gentle persistence made him want to answer. "I was adopted when I was very young," Samuel heard himself saying. "I don't remember much about my early childhood. My adoptive parents were wonderful people who gave me every opportunity to succeed. They encouraged my interest in medicine and supported me through medical school." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as he spoke, and her grip tightened on the photograph in her hands. "How young were you when you were adopted?" 3 years old, I believe. My adoptive parents told me that my birth mother was very young and unable to care for me. They said she wanted me to have opportunities she couldn't provide." The tears were flowing freely down Eleanor's cheeks now, and Samuel felt a growing alarm. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you all right? Should I call for a nurse?" "No," she said quickly, reaching out to touch his arm just as she had the night before. "Please don't go. Dr. Chen, what was your name before you were adopted? Do you remember?" Samuel stared at her, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "Iwaisu, my adoptive parents told me my birth name was David Morrison, but I was so young when they adopted me that I don't have any clear memories of being called by that name." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, and she began to sob openly. The photograph slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. Samuel quickly picked it up, and as he turned it over, his world tilted on its axis. The photograph showed a young woman, perhaps 19 or 20 years old, holding a small boy who appeared to be around 2 or 3 years of age. The woman had the same clear blue eyes that Samuel had been struck by in Eleanor, and the little boy in her arms had distinctive dark eyes and the same gentle expression that Samuel saw in his own mirror each morning. "Mrs. Whitmore," Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who is this in the photograph?" Eleanor looked up at him through her tears, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with a pain that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "That's my daughter Margaret and her son," she said. "Her son David, my grandson, who I had to give up when Margaret died in a car accident when he was 3 years old." Samuel felt the room spinning around him. The photograph trembled in his hands as he stared at the image of the little boy who looked so much like his own childhood pictures. Margaret Morrison, he whispered. Yes, Eleanor said, reaching out to take his free hand. Margaret Morrison was my daughter. And if I'm right, if God has brought us together after all these years, then you are my grandson David. You are the little boy I held in my arms and sang to sleep, the child I loved more than life itself, and have mourned losing every single day. For the past 39 years, the words hit Samuel like a physical blow. He stared at Eleanor, searching her face for any sign that this was some kind of mistake or confusion brought on by her medication or condition. But the clarity in her eyes, the certainty in her voice, and most of all, the undeniable resemblance between the child in the photograph and his own baby pictures left no room for doubt. I don't understand, Samuel said, his voice shaking. My adoptive parents told me that my birth mother couldn't care for me. They never mentioned a grandmother. Eleanor's grip on his hand tightened. After Margaret died, I was devastated. I was only 44 years old, but I felt like my entire world had ended. Margaret was my only child, and you were all I had left of her. But I was struggling with my own grief, and I was afraid I couldn't provide for you properly. The social worker convinced me that you would be better off with a young family who could give you stability and opportunities. Tears were streaming down Samuel's face now, though he was barely aware of them. You gave me up because you thought it was best for me? It was the hardest decision I ever made, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. I signed those papers, and then I watched them drive away with you, and I felt like I was dying inside. I tried to find out what happened to you over the years, but the adoption was closed and they wouldn't give me any information. I've wondered about you every single day since then. Samuel looked down at the photograph again, seeing now what he had missed before. The woman holding the child wasn't just any young mother. She had Eleanor's bone structure, the same delicate features that age had softened but not erased. And the child in her arms was unmistakably him. The social worker said your new family had changed your name to Samuel Chen, Eleanor continued. I always hoped that Samuel was happy, that he was loved, that he grew up to be the remarkable person I always knew he could be. But I never imagined that I would ever see him again. Samuel set the photograph carefully on the bedside table and looked into Eleanor's eyes. All these years I wondered about my birth family. I wondered if I had grandparents somewhere, if there was anyone who remembered my mother. I remembered everything, Eleanor whispered. Every story I read to you, every song I sang, every night I tucked you into bed. You used to call me Nana, Ellie, and you had this little stuffed elephant that you carried everywhere. You were the sweetest, most curious little boy, always asking questions about everything. Something deep in Samuel's memory stirred at her words. A flash of a soft voice singing lullabies, the feeling of being safe and loved, the scent of lavender and vanilla that he had never been able to identify, but that had always comforted him. And suddenly, he could almost hear a small voice calling out Nana Ellie in the distant reaches of his mind. I remember you, he said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. Not clearly, but there are pieces. A woman with kind eyes who made me feel safe. Someone who smelled like flowers and always had time to answer my questions. Eleanor began to cry again, but these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. You do remember? Oh, David, Samuel, I can't believe you remember. They sat in silence for several minutes, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Samuel found himself studying Eleanor's face, seeing now the family resemblance that he had sensed but not understood the night before. The shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, even her gentle manner of speaking, all of it felt familiar because it was part of his own heritage. Mrs. Whitmore, Nana Ellie, Samuel said, testing the name on his tongue. I can't believe this is real. Call me Eleanor or Grandma or Nana Ellie if it feels right, she said, smiling through her tears. I just can't believe that after all these years you found me. Or rather, I found you. Actually, Samuel said, a small smile beginning to form on his lips, I think you might say that your heart brought us together. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, processing the incredible chain of events that had brought them together. So when you called me by a name no one else knew last night, I almost called you David because that's who you'll always be in my heart. My sweet grandson David, the little boy who loved his stuffed elephant and wanted to heal everything that was broken. Samuel looked at the photograph again, at the image of his 3-year-old self in his mother's arms, and felt a profound sense of completeness that he hadn't even realized he was missing. For the first time in his adult life, he understood where he had come from, who his people were, and why he had always felt like there was something missing from his carefully constructed existence. Nana Ellie, he said softly, using the name that felt both foreign and familiar on his tongue. I want to know everything. I want to know about Mom, about our family, about you. I want to hear all the stories you've been saving up to tell me. Eleanor's face lit up with a joy so radiant that it seemed to illuminate the entire hospital room. Oh, David, Samuel, I have so many stories to share with you, so many memories I've been holding on to, hoping that someday I'd have the chance to pass them on to you. As they sat together in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the sounds and smells of modern medicine, both Samuel and Eleanor felt the weight of 39 years of separation beginning to lift. They had found each other again, against all odds, and nothing would ever be the same. The revelation hung between them like a bridge spanning decades of separation. Samuel found himself unable to look away from Eleanor's face, as if he were trying to memorize every line and feature that connected him to a past he had never fully understood. The clinical part of his mind, the part that had been trained to remain objective and analytical, struggled to process the emotional tsunami that was crashing over him. I need to ask you something, Samuel said quietly, his voice still trembling with the aftershock of discovery. The name you almost called me last night when you said I had a healing touch like someone you knew. Were you about to say my birth name? Eleanor nodded, fresh tears welling in her eyes. I almost called you David when I saw you caring for me with such gentleness. It reminded me so much of the little boy who used to bandage his stuffed animals when he thought they were hurt. You were always so caring, so concerned about others, even as a small child. Samuel closed his eyes, and suddenly another memory surfaced, clearer than before. A small boy sitting on a kitchen floor, carefully wrapping a toy elephant's leg with a makeshift bandage made from a dish towel, while a kind voice praised his gentle touch. I remember the elephant, he said softly. Mr. Peanuts, I remember being very worried that his leg was broken. You cried for an entire afternoon when you thought Mr. Peanuts was hurt, Eleanor said, her voice filled with wonder. I had to assure you over and over that stuffed animals could heal from anything with enough love and care. That's when I knew you had a healer's heart. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Samuel. Here he was, a successful surgeon who had dedicated his life to healing others, and it turned out that his calling had been recognized by his grandmother before he was even old enough to understand what healing meant. Eleanor, Samuel said, testing her name again. I need to know about my mother, Margaret. The adoptive parents told me very little about her, just that she was young and couldn't care for me. Will you tell me about her? Eleanor's expression softened, and she reached again for the photograph on the bedside table. Margaret was beautiful, inside and out. She was 21 when you were born, and she loved you more than anything in the world. She wasn't married. Your father was a young man she had met in college who wasn't ready for the responsibility of a family. But Margaret never regretted having you. Samuel found himself leaning forward, hungry for every detail about the mother. He had never really known. What was she like? She was studying to be a teacher when she got pregnant with you. She had to leave school for a while, but she was determined to go back and finish her degree once you were older. She was incredibly smart, just like you. She read to you constantly, even when you were just a baby. She used to say that she wanted to fill your mind with beautiful words and stories. How did she die? Samuel asked gently. Eleanor's face crumpled, with pain that looked as fresh as if the tragedy had happened yesterday, instead of nearly 4 decades ago. It was December, just 3 days before Christmas, She had gone out to do some last-minute shopping for your presents. The roads were Lewis and a drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car. She died instantly. Samuel felt his chest tighten with grief for a woman he could barely remember, but who had clearly loved him deeply. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry you lost her, and I'm sorry I lost her too." "She would be so proud of you," Eleanor said through her tears. "A doctor saving lives every day. She always said you were going to do something important with your life." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both processing the magnitude of what they had discovered. Samuel found himself studying Eleanor's hands, noting how they were still elegant despite her age, with long fingers that reminded him of his own. He had always wondered where certain physical traits had come from, and now he was beginning to see the family resemblances that had been hidden from him for so long. "Eleanor, can I ask you about the decision to give me up for adoption? I need to understand what happened." Eleanor took a deep breath, clearly preparing herself for what she knew would be a difficult conversation. "After Margaret died, I was completely lost. I had been helping her care for you, and suddenly I was responsible for a 3-year-old child while dealing with my own overwhelming grief. I was working as a secretary at an insurance company, barely making enough money to support myself, let alone a growing child." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The social worker who came to help with the arrangements after Margaret's death was very kind, but she was also very realistic about my situation. She pointed out that I was a single woman in her 40s with limited income and no experience raising a child on my own. She showed me profiles of families who were desperate to adopt, families who could provide you with 2 parents, financial security, and opportunities that I couldn't offer. Samuel nodded, trying to understand the impossible position she had been placed in. It must have been an incredibly difficult decision. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "But I loved you so much that I wanted what was best for you, even if it meant breaking my own heart. The social worker assured me that you would be placed with a wonderful family, people who had been trying to have children for years and who would treasure you. The Chens were good parents," Samuel said quietly. "They loved me, encouraged me, gave me every opportunity to succeed. They never made me feel like I was anything other than their beloved son." Eleanor's face showed relief at his words. "I'm so glad. That's all I ever wanted for you, to be loved and to have the chance to become whoever you were meant to be. But you suffered for it," Samuel observed. "You gave up your own happiness to ensure mine." "I would make the same choice again," Eleanor said firmly. "Seeing you now, knowing what you've accomplished, knowing that you're a healer who helps people every day, it validates every moment of pain I've endured over the years." Samuel reached out and took her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. "But think about all the years we lost, all the birthdays, graduations, holidays we could have shared, all the conversations we never had. I thought about you every single day," Eleanor said. "On your birthday each year, I would light a candle and wonder where you were, what you were doing, whether you were happy. At Christmas, I would buy you a present and donate it to charity, pretending I was giving it to you. I followed your career once I learned your name. I have newspaper clippings about your medical achievements, articles about surgeries you've performed." Samuel stared at her in amazement. "You've been following my career. About 10 years ago, I hired a private investigator to find out what had happened to you. It wasn't easy. The adoption records were sealed. But eventually, he was able to determine that David Morrison had become Dr. Samuel Chen, cardiac surgeon at Metropolitan General Hospital. I've been so proud of you, even from a distance." "You. Do I worked here?" Samuel asked, incredulous. Eleanor nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "I used to drive by the hospital sometimes, hoping I might catch a glimpse of you. I saw you once about 5 years ago, walking out of the main entrance. You looked so professional and dignified in your white coat, and I just sat in my car and cried because I was so proud and so heartbroken at the same time." The revelation stunned Samuel. All these years, his grandmother had been nearby, watching over him from afar, celebrating his successes and sharing his life from a distance. The thought of her sitting alone in her car, watching him unknowingly, filled him with a mixture of sadness and wonder. "Eleanor, why didn't you ever try to contact me directly?" "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that you wouldn't want to know me. Afraid that I would disrupt the life you had built. I was afraid that you might be angry with me for giving you up, or that you might not remember me at all. And part of me felt like I had no right to come back into your life after making the choice to leave it." Samuel squeezed her hand gently. "I could never be angry with you for doing what you thought was best for me. And as for disrupting my life," he paused, considering his words carefully. "Eleanor, my life has been successful professionally, but it's been rather empty personally. I've spent so much time focused on my career that I've neglected relationships, family, the things that really matter. Finding you, having family again, it doesn't disrupt my life. It completes it." Eleanor began to cry again, but these were tears of relief and joy. "I've prayed for this moment for so many years. I never dared to hope it would actually happen. When you had your heart episode yesterday, was it really just a coincidence that you ended up here in my hospital?" Eleanor smiled through her tears. "I've been having some minor heart issues for a few months now. Yesterday, when the chest pains started, I could have called for an ambulance to take me to St. Mary's, which is much closer to my apartment. But I specifically asked the paramedics to bring me to Metropolitan General. You planned this? Not exactly planned, but hoped for, maybe. I thought that if I was going to have a medical emergency, perhaps fate would let me meet my grandson, even if he never knew who I was. I thought maybe I could see you one more time, speak with you, and carry that memory with me for whatever time I had left." Over the next several hours, Samuel found himself doing something he had never done in his entire medical career. He cleared his schedule to spend time with a patient. He called his colleague, Dr. Rodriguez, to cover his afternoon appointments, and asked the nursing staff to hold all non-emergency calls. For the first time in decades, Dr. Samuel Chen was putting his personal life ahead of his professional obligations, and surprisingly, it felt completely right. Eleanor had asked the nurses to raise her bed so she could sit up more comfortably, and Samuel had pulled his chair closer so they could look through the small collection of photographs and mementos she had brought with her to the hospital. She had been carrying them in her purse for years, she explained, unable to bear the thought of leaving them at home where they might be lost or damaged. "This was taken on your second birthday," Eleanor said, pointing to a faded color photograph of a toddler with dark hair and serious eyes, sitting in front of a small cake with 2 candles. "Margaret made that cake herself. It was chocolate, with vanilla frosting, your favorite even then. You were so determined to blow out both candles by yourself that you nearly fell face first into the cake trying to get close enough." Samuel studied the photograph intently, searching for any spark of memory. "I don't remember the birthday, but I do remember always loving chocolate cake. The Chens used to joke that I would choose chocolate cake over any other dessert, no matter what the occasion. Margaret said you had very definite opinions about food from a very early age." Eleanor laughed. "You loved grilled cheese sandwiches cut diagonally. You refused to eat any vegetable that was green, and you would only drink milk if it was in a blue cup. You were quite particular for such a little person." "I still prefer my sandwiches cut diagonally," Samuel admitted with a smile. "I never knew where that preference came from." Eleanor reached into her small collection and pulled out a tiny knitted sweater, yellowed with age but still clearly made with great care and love. "I made this for you when you were about 18 months old. Margaret said it was your favorite piece of clothing. You insisted on wearing it even when it got too small for you." Samuel reached out to touch the soft wool, and suddenly he was overwhelmed by a sensory memory so vivid it took his breath away. The feeling of soft yarn against his skin, the scent of lavender and something else he couldn't identify, and most clearly, the sensation of being held close while someone hummed a gentle tune. "You used to hum to me," he said suddenly, the memory crystallizing as he spoke. "When I wore that sweater, you would hold me and hum a song, I can almost hear it, but I can't quite remember the melody." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again. "It was Edelweiss," she said softly. "From The Sound of Music. Margaret and I both loved that movie, and you seemed to find the song very soothing. Whenever you were fussy or couldn't sleep, I would hold you and hum that song until you calmed down." Without thinking about it, Eleanor began to hum the familiar melody, and Samuel felt something deep inside his chest seem to unlock. The tune was achingly familiar, and as she hummed, more memories began to surface. Being rocked in someone's arms, feeling completely safe and loved, the sound of a gentle voice singing him to sleep. "I've hummed that song my entire life when I'm stressed or anxious," Samuel said in wonder. "I never knew where I learned it. During medical school, during difficult surgeries, whenever I needed to calm myself down, I would hum that exact tune. Music has a way of staying with us even when other memories fade," Eleanor said. "I'm so glad that piece of our time together stayed with you." They spent the next hour going through more photographs and mementos. There was a lock of baby hair tied with a blue ribbon, a small wooden toy car that Samuel had apparently been obsessed with, and several more pictures of him with his mother Margaret. As they looked at each image, Eleanor shared stories that helped Samuel understand not just his own early childhood, but also the woman who had given birth to him. "Your mother was incredibly bright," Eleanor said, showing him a photograph of Margaret at her high school graduation. She graduated valedictorian of her class and received a full scholarship to the state university. She wanted to be an elementary school teacher because she said children deserve to have someone who truly cared about their education and their dreams. "She looks so young," Samuel observed, studying his mother's face in the graduation photo. Margaret had been beautiful, with Eleanor's delicate features and the same intelligent eyes that Samuel saw in his own reflection. She was young, but she was also wise beyond her years. When she found out she was pregnant with you, she never once considered giving you up. She said you were a gift, even if the timing wasn't perfect. She worked part-time while she was pregnant, saved every penny she could, and made plans to return to school once you were old enough for daycare." "What about my father?" Samuel asked quietly. "You mentioned he wasn't ready for responsibility." Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. "Robert Collins was a charming young man who made promises he had no intention of keeping. When Margaret told him she was pregnant, he suggested she take care of it and disappeared from her life completely. She tried to contact him after you were born, thinking maybe when he saw you he would feel differently, but he had transferred to a different school and left no forwarding address." Samuel nodded, feeling surprisingly little emotion about his absent father. "Did she ever hear from him again?" "Never. And honestly, I think that was for the best. Margaret and you were better off without someone who could walk away so easily from his own child." They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Nurse Jennifer entered with Eleanor's lunch tray and stopped short when she saw Samuel still sitting beside the bed, clearly engaged in deep conversation with his patient. "Dr. Chen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Rodriguez has been looking for you. He said to tell you that the Morrison case has been moved to tomorrow morning, and that he's covered your afternoon rounds." "Thank you, Jennifer," Samuel said. "Please tell Dr. Rodriguez I appreciate his help." After Jennifer left, Eleanor looked at Samuel with curiosity. "The Morrison case?" Samuel realized the irony of the name coincidence. "A patient scheduled for surgery tomorrow. The name Morrison is fairly common, but hearing it now..." He trailed off, thinking about how many times he had heard that surname over the years without ever realizing it was his birth name. "Do you ever wonder how different your life might have been if Margaret hadn't died?" Eleanor asked gently. Samuel considered the question carefully. "I think about it now, yes. But I've learned enough about life to know that wondering about what-if scenarios usually leads to unnecessary pain. The Chens gave me opportunities I might not have had otherwise. They supported my dream of becoming a doctor, paid for my education, and loved me unconditionally. I can't regret a life that led me to be able to help people." "But you've been alone," Eleanor observed. "Jennifer mentioned that you're not married, don't have children. Are you happy with your life? It was a question Samuel had been avoiding, asking himself for years. I thought I was, he said honestly. I've been so focused on my career, on achieving success, that I convinced myself that was enough. But meeting you, learning about our family, has made me realize how much I've been missing. It's not too late, Eleanor said firmly. You're only 42 years old. You have time to build the personal relationships you've been neglecting. What about you? Samuel asked. You've been alone for 39 years, mourning the loss of Margaret and me. Have you been happy? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. I found ways to create meaning in my life, she said finally. I volunteered at the Children's Hospital for 20 years, reading to young patients. I tutored children in reading at the Beck local library. I found ways to channel my love for you and Margaret into caring for other people's children. That's beautiful, Samuel said, recognizing the same impulse to heal and help that had driven his own career choices. But no, Eleanor continued, I haven't been truly happy. There's been a hole in my heart for almost 4 decades, a constant ache for the family I lost. I've lived with the hope that someday I might see you again, but I never really believed it would happen. Samuel reached out and took her hand again. Well, it has happened. We've found each other again, and I don't intend to let you disappear from my life again. What do you mean? Eleanor asked, hope flickering in her eyes. I mean that we have 39 years to catch up on. I want to know everything about you, about our family history, about the woman who sacrificed her own happiness to give me a better life. And I want you to know about my life too. Not just the professional achievements, but the person I've become, the dreams I still have, the life I want to build going forward. Eleanor squeezed his hand tightly. I would love that more than anything in the world. There's something else, Samuel said, his voice growing more serious. I want to take care of you now. You mentioned earlier that you've been having heart problems for a few months. I want to make sure you get the best possible medical care, and I want to be involved in your treatment. Samuel, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted gently. For 39 years, you've worried about me from a distance, wondering if I was okay, if I was happy, if I was healthy. Now it's my turn to worry about you, to make sure you're taken care of. That's what family does for each other. Eleanor began to cry again, but Samuel could see that these were tears of overwhelming gratitude and relief. I never dreamed that finding you again would mean having someone to share my life with, she said. I thought if I was lucky enough to see you once more, it would just be a brief encounter, a chance to know that you were well. You're going to be stuck with me now, Samuel said with a smile. I hope you're prepared for a grandson who asks a lot of questions and wants to make up for lost time. I've been waiting 39 years to answer your questions, Eleanor replied. I think I'm ready. As the afternoon sun streamed through the hospital room window, Samuel found himself experiencing something he hadn't felt since he was a small child. The complete security and comfort that comes from knowing you belong somewhere, that there are people in the world who love you unconditionally simply because you exist. For the first time in his adult life, Dr. Samuel Chen was no longer alone in the world. He had family again, and nothing would ever be the same. That evening, Samuel made another unprecedented decision in his carefully ordered life. Instead of returning to his sterile apartment to review medical journals and prepare for the next day's surgeries, he remained at the hospital long past his usual hours. He had dinner brought to Eleanor's room, and they shared their first meal together in 39 years, while she continued to fill in the missing pieces of his personal history. Tell me about the Chens, Eleanor said as they ate. I want to know about the people who raised my grandson. Samuel smiled, thinking of his adoptive parents. Dr. James Chen was a pediatrician, and Linda Chen was a high school English teacher. They had been trying to have children for 8 years when they adopted me. They were wonderful parents, patient, loving, and incredibly supportive of everything I wanted to do. Are they still alive? Eleanor asked. Dad died of a heart attack. When I was in my second year of medical school, Mom passed away from cancer about 5 years ago. I miss them both terribly, but I'm grateful for the time we had together. Eleanor reached across the small table and touched his hand. I'm sorry you lost them. They must have been very special. People to have raised such a compassionate man. They were, Samuel agreed. They never hid the fact that I was adopted, but they also never made me feel like I was anything other than their beloved son. They encouraged my curiosity about my birth family, but they also respected my decision not to actively search for information about my past. Why didn't you search? Eleanor asked gently. Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. I think I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid that if I found my birth family, I might discover something that would change how I felt about the Chens. Afraid that I might learn my birth parents didn't want me. Afraid that the reality wouldn't live up to my imagination. And now? Now I know that my birth mother loved me desperately, and my grandmother sacrificed her own happiness to give me the best possible life. I know that I was wanted and loved, even if circumstances made it impossible for us to be together. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Margaret would be so proud of the man you've become. She always said you were going to do something important with your life, and she was right. I wish I could remember her more clearly, Samuel said. The memories are so fragmented, just impressions and feelings more than actual events. That's normal, Eleanor assured him. You were very young when she died, but I can tell you stories about her that will help you understand who she was. She was incredibly creative. She used to make up elaborate bedtime stories for you, complete with different voices for all the characters. I've always loved stories, Samuel said. Even now, I find that I learn best when information is presented as a narrative, rather than just facts and figures. She used to read to you for hours, Eleanor continued. Picture books when you were tiny, but as you got older, she started reading you chapter books that were really too advanced for your age. She said you had an exceptional attention span, and that you understood more than most people gave you credit for. What kinds of books? Everything. Classic fairy tales, stories about animals, even some of her college literature textbooks. She said you were particularly fascinated by stories about people who helped others. Doctors, teachers, firefighters, anyone whose job involved taking care of people. Samuel felt a chill of recognition. I remember always being drawn to books about people in helping professions. Even as a child, I was fascinated by the idea of being able to fix things that were broken to help people feel better. Margaret used to say that you had an old soul, Eleanor said. She said you seemed to understand that the world could be a difficult place, but that you wanted to do something to make it better. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Dr. Rodriguez, Samuel's colleague who had covered his afternoon appointments, entered with a concerned expression. Samuel, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to check on you. It's not like you to miss appointments without a detailed explanation. Is everything all right? Samuel looked at Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. Miguel, I'd like you to meet Eleanor. Whitmore. Eleanor, this is Dr. Miguel Rodriguez, one of my closest colleagues. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Whitmore, Miguel said politely, then turned back to Samuel with a questioning look. Miguel, Eleanor is my grandmother, Samuel said simply. Miguel stared at him in shock. Your grandmother? But I thought you didn't have any living relatives. I thought so too until yesterday. It's a long story, but Eleanor and I were reunited completely by chance when she was admitted to the cardiac unit. Miguel looked between Samuel and Eleanor, clearly trying to process this unexpected information. That's incredible. How did you find each other after all these years? We didn't find each other, Eleanor said with a smile. We were brought together by the most unlikely circumstances. I had chest pains and was brought to this hospital, and Samuel was the cardiologist who treated me. We recognized each other through old photographs and memories. This is amazing, Miguel said, pulling up a chair. Samuel, I've known you for 10 years, and I've never seen you look this happy. You're practically glowing. Samuel realized that Miguel was right. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely happy rather than just professionally satisfied. "It's been an emotional day," he said. "I'm learning about parts of my life I never knew existed." "Mrs. Whitmore, may I ask how long you've been looking for Samuel?" 39 years, Eleanor said quietly. "I gave him up for adoption when he was 3 years old, after his mother, my daughter, died in a car accident. I've thought about him every single day since then." Miguel's expression softened. "That must have been incredibly difficult for you." "It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but seeing Samuel now, knowing what he's accomplished, I know it was the right choice. He's become exactly the kind of person I always hoped he would be." "Samuel is one of the best surgeons I've ever worked with," Miguel said. "He's saved hundreds of lives and he's mentored dozens of young doctors. You should be very proud of him." "I am," Eleanor said, looking at Samuel with obvious love and pride. "More proud than I can express." Miguel stood to leave. "I'll let you two continue catching up. Samuel, take tomorrow off if you need to. I can cover your surgeries." "Thank you, Miguel, but I'll be here. I have the Morrison case scheduled for 8 a.m. and I don't want to postpone it." After Miguel left, Eleanor looked at Samuel with curiosity. "You mentioned that patient earlier. Morrison was your birth name, wasn't it?" "Yes, it was. I find it interesting that after learning about my birth family, I'm scheduled to operate on someone with my original surname. It feels like some kind of sign." "Maybe it is," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's a reminder that even though your name changed, your essential nature, your desire to heal and help people, remained the same." Samuel considered this. "You know, I've never thought about it that way, but you might be right. The Chens changed my name, but they couldn't change who I was fundamentally meant to be. That's because who you are comes from here," Eleanor said, placing her hand over her heart. "Not from what you're called. You were born to be a healer, Samuel. That calling came from your mother, and from generations of our family who have always been the ones others turned to when they needed help. Were there other doctors in our family? Not doctors exactly, but healers in different ways. Your great-grandmother was a midwife who delivered babies for women in our small town. Your grandfather, my late husband, was a veterinarian who treated farm animals. Your mother wanted to be a teacher, which is another kind of healing, helping young minds grow and develop." Samuel felt a deep sense of connection to this family history he had never known about. "It's like I inherited a calling that I didn't even know was part of my heritage." "You did," Eleanor said firmly, "and you've honored that calling in the most beautiful way possible. You've dedicated your life to saving others, to giving families more time together, to healing hearts, literally and figuratively." As the evening grew later, Samuel found himself reluctant to leave. He had never experienced the kind of deep, unconditional acceptance that Eleanor was offering him. She loved him not because of what he had accomplished, but simply because he was her grandson, her family, the child she had never stopped loving. "Eleanor, I want to ask you something," Samuel said as the hour grew late. "What are your living arrangements? Are you comfortable where you are?" "I have a small apartment about 20 minutes from here. It's adequate for my needs, but it's quite lonely most of the time. I have a large house with several spare bedrooms," Samuel said carefully. "I bought it thinking I would eventually have a family to fill it, but I've been living there alone for years. Would you consider moving in with me, at least temporarily, while we get to know each other again?" Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. "Samuel, I couldn't impose on you like that." "You wouldn't be imposing. You'd be making my house into a home. I've been living like a monk for years, focused only on work. Having you there would give me a reason to actually live in my house instead of just sleeping there between hospital shifts." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering his offer. "Are you sure? Having an elderly woman underfoot might cramp your style." Samuel laughed, the first genuine laugh he had experienced in months. "Eleanor, I'm 42 years old, and I spend my free time reading medical journals and reorganizing my sock drawer. I don't have a style to cramp. What I have is a big, empty house and a grandmother I've just found again after 39 years. I can't think of anything I'd rather do than spend time getting to know you better. In that case, Eleanor said with a smile that transformed her entire face, I would love to come stay with you, at least for a while, until we figure out what comes next. What comes next is that we become a family again, Samuel said. We take care of each other, we share our lives, and we make up for as much lost time as possible. Eleanor reached out and took his hand. I never dared to hope for something like this. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, with only my memories of you and Margaret. Well, you're not alone anymore, Samuel said firmly. You have me and I have you, and we're going to build a life together. It might not be the traditional family setup, but it's our family, and that's what matters. As they sat together in the quiet hospital room, both Samuel and Eleanor felt something that had been missing from their lives for decades. The sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than themselves, of having someone who cared about their well-being simply because they existed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and adjustments, but tonight they were together again, and that was enough. 3 months later, Dr. Samuel Chen stood in the kitchen of his large Victorian home, preparing breakfast for 2. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now filled with the sounds of life. Eleanor's gentle humming as she tended to the garden they had planted together, the morning news playing softly on the radio, the comfortable sounds of a shared life that Samuel had never experienced before. Eleanor had been discharged from the hospital 2 days after their reunion. Her heart, condition stabilized and her spirits completely transformed. True to his word, Samuel had insisted she move in with him, and what had started as a temporary arrangement had evolved into something neither of them wanted to change. For the first time in decades, both Samuel and Eleanor were experiencing the joy of having family. Good morning, Nana Ellie, Samuel said as Eleanor entered the kitchen, her arms full of fresh flowers from their garden. Good morning, dear, she replied, the endearment coming naturally after months of relearning how to be family to each other. The roses are particularly beautiful this morning. I think they're happy about all the attention we've been giving them. Samuel smiled as he watched her arrange the flowers in a vase. In the 3 months since Eleanor had come to live with him, he had discovered aspects of himself that he hadn't known existed. He found that he enjoyed gardening, that he had a talent for cooking, and most surprisingly, that he was capable of the kind of deep, unconditional love that he had thought was beyond his emotional range. I have some news, Samuel said as they sat down to breakfast together. Good news, I hope? Very good news. Do you remember Dr. Patricia Williams, the nurse who was working the night we met? Of course, she was very kind to me. Well, Patricia has been talking to the hospital administration about starting a program to help elderly patients who don't have family support. She wants to create a volunteer network where medical staff can spend additional time with patients who are alone, providing not just medical care but emotional support as well. Eleanor's face lit up with interest. That sounds wonderful. Many elderly people face medical crises without anyone to comfort them or advocate for them. That's exactly what Patricia was thinking, and she's asked me to help develop the program. Samuel paused, setting down his coffee cup. But more importantly, she's asked if you would consider being involved. She thinks your experience and perspective would be invaluable. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. She wants me to help. She wants you to be the program coordinator. It would involve training volunteers, spending time with isolated patients, and helping to create the kind of connection that we found with each other. Samuel, I would love that more than anything, to be able to help other people find the comfort and support they need during difficult times. It would give such meaning to my life. Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. Patricia said something else that I think you'd find interesting. She said that watching us reconnect made her realize how many people are living without the family connections they need. She wants to call the program Eleanor's Angels in your honor. Eleanor began to cry openly now, overwhelmed by the thought that her name would be associated with helping others find the kind of love and support she had rediscovered with Samuel. I can't believe that our story could inspire something so beautiful. Our story has inspired a lot of people, Samuel said. Word has gotten around the hospital about how we found each other, and several staff members have told me that it's made them think about their own family relationships, about reaching out to relatives they've lost touch with. Really? Dr. Rodriguez called his estranged brother for the first time in 5 years. Jennifer Martinez drove 6 hours to visit her elderly aunt, who had been asking to see her. Even the hospital chaplain said our story reminded him why he became a chaplain in the first place. Eleanor squeezed his hand. To think that finding each other again could have such a ripple effect, it's almost too wonderful to believe. There's something else, Samuel said, his expression becoming more serious. I've been thinking a lot about my life, about the choices I've made and the ones I want to make going forward. What do you mean? I've spent so many years focused exclusively on my career that I missed out on so many other aspects of life. Having you in my life has made me realize how much I've been missing. I want to create more balance, to make time for relationships and experiences outside of the hospital. Eleanor studied his face carefully. Are you thinking of retiring? Not retiring, but scaling back. I want to continue practicing medicine, but I also want to have time for other things. Time to travel with you, to learn more about our family, history, to maybe even... He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. To maybe even what? To maybe even date someone. I know it sounds ridiculous at my age, but I've realized that I would like to have a romantic relationship, maybe even get married someday. Having you in my life has shown me how much richer life can be when you have people you love and who love you back. Eleanor's face broke into a radiant smile. Samuel, it's not ridiculous at all. You're a wonderful man with so much love to give. Any woman would be lucky to have you in her life. I actually have someone in mind, Samuel said, his cheeks reddening slightly. Tell me, do you remember Dr. Sarah Martinez from the cardiac unit? She's been very supportive during your recovery, and we've started having coffee together occasionally. Eleanor clapped her hands together in delight. Sarah is lovely. She's intelligent, compassionate, and she clearly cares about you. Have you asked her out on a proper date? Not yet, but I'm planning to. I wanted to talk to you about it first, to make sure you'd be comfortable with me dating someone. Eleanor reached over and cupped his face in her hands, a gesture that reminded Samuel of the maternal love he had missed for so many years. My dear grandson, I want nothing more than to see you happy and fulfilled in every aspect of your life. If Sarah makes you happy, then I'm delighted. What if it leads to something serious? What if I get married? Would you be okay with sharing me with someone else? Samuel, love doesn't diminish when it's shared. It multiplies. If you fall in love and get married, it won't mean you love me less. It will mean that our family circle grows larger. And if Sarah is the right person for you, she'll understand how important our relationship is. Samuel felt a wave of gratitude for Eleanor's wisdom and generosity. How did you get so wise about love and relationships? 70 years of living and 39 years of missing you, Eleanor said simply. I've learned that love is the most precious thing we have, and we should never waste an opportunity to give it or receive it. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, both contemplating how much their lives had changed since that fateful night 3 months ago, when a chest pain had brought Eleanor to Metropolitan General Hospital. After clearing the dishes, they sat together in the living room, looking through photo albums that Eleanor had retrieved from her apartment. She had been slowly moving her belongings into Samuel's house, and each box revealed new treasures from their family's past. Look at this, Eleanor said, pulling out a small, leather-bound journal. This was your mother's diary from when you were a baby. She wrote in it almost every day, documenting your milestones and her thoughts about being a young mother. Samuel handled the journal reverently. May I read some of it? Of course, I think Margaret would want you to know her thoughts and feelings about you. Samuel opened the journal to a random page and began to read aloud. David said his first word today. "Mama." I cried tears of joy when I heard it. He is such a perfect little person, so curious about everything around him. Sometimes I look at him and wonder what kind of man he'll become. I hope he'll be kind and strong and that he'll find work that makes him feel like he's making a difference in the world. Both Samuel and Eleanor were crying now, moved by the intimate glimpse into Margaret's hopes and dreams for her son. "She would be so proud of you," Eleanor whispered. "I wish I could tell her about the life I've built, about the patience I've saved, about finding you again." "I believe she knows," Eleanor said firmly. "I believe she's been watching over both of us all these years. And I believe she played a role in bringing us back together." Samuel continued reading from the journal, learning about his first steps, his favorite toys, and his mother's plans for their future together. Each entry revealed the depth of Margaret's love for him and her determination to give him the best life possible despite their circumstances. "Listen to this entry," Samuel said, finding a page dated just a week before Margaret's death. "I've been having dreams about David grown up, and in every dream he's helping people. Sometimes he's a doctor, sometimes a teacher, sometimes just a kind man who makes others feel better about themselves. I don't know what his future holds, but I know he has a gift for making people feel loved and cared for. Whatever he becomes, I know he'll make the world a little bit better just by being in it." Eleanor sobbed openly as Samuel read those words. "She saw your future so clearly even when you were just a toddler." "It's almost like she knew something was going to happen to her," Samuel observed. "These later entries have a quality of preparation to them, as if she was trying to document everything she wanted me to know about her love for me." They spent the rest of the morning reading through Margaret's journal, learning about the woman who had given Samuel life and the grandmother who had loved them both enough to make the ultimate sacrifice. By the time they finished, both felt a deeper connection not only to each other, but to the woman whose death had separated them so many years ago. That afternoon, Samuel received a call from the hospital. The Morrison surgery he had performed 3 months ago, on the same day he had met Eleanor, needed a follow-up consultation. As he prepared to leave for the hospital, Eleanor kissed his cheek and said, "Give my best to Mr. Morrison. I feel like his surgery was somehow connected to our reunion." "I will," Samuel promised. "And when I get back, I'm going to call Sarah and ask her to dinner." "I'm proud of you for taking that step," Eleanor said. "Life is too short to wait for the perfect moment." As Samuel drove to the hospital, he reflected on how much his life had changed in just 3 months. He had gone from being a successful but lonely man to someone who was part of a family again. He had rediscovered his capacity for love, learned about his heritage, and found the courage to open his heart to new possibilities. At the hospital, he was pleased to find that Mr. Morrison's recovery was progressing beautifully. As he explained the positive test results to his patient, Samuel found himself thinking about the strange coincidence that had brought a patient with his birth name to his operating table on the same day he had been reunited with his grandmother. "Dr. Chen," Mr. Morrison said as Samuel prepared to leave, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for me. My wife says I'm like a new man since the surgery. I have energy I haven't had in years, and I'm planning to be around for a long time to enjoy my grandchildren." "That's wonderful to hear, Mr. Morrison. Take care of yourself." As Samuel left the hospital that evening, he thought about Mr. Morrison's gratitude and his mention of grandchildren. Samuel was now someone's grandchild again, and someday, if things worked out with Sarah, he might even become a grandfather himself. The possibilities seemed endless. He called Sarah from his car, and she accepted his dinner invitation with enthusiasm that made his heart race. As he drove home to share the news with Eleanor, Samuel realized that his life had come full circle in the most beautiful way possible. He had started as David Morrison, a beloved child who had lost his family. He had become Samuel Chen, a successful surgeon who had saved countless lives but had forgotten to save room in his own life for love. And now he was both, a healer who had rediscovered his capacity for being healed, a man who had found his family and was ready to create a new one. When he arrived home, Eleanor was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of tea and a smile that lit up the entire room. "How did the call go?" she asked. "Sarah said yes to dinner," Samuel said, unable to keep the happiness out of his voice. "I'm so proud of you," Eleanor said, embracing him warmly. "And I'm so grateful that we found each other again." "We didn't just find each other," Samuel said, holding his grandmother close. "We found ourselves, we found our family, we found our way home." Outside, the sun was setting over the garden they had planted together, and inside, two people who had been alone for far too long were finally truly home. The surgeon had comforted the old lady, and she had called him by a name no one else knew, and in doing so, she had given him back not just his past, but his future as well. Their story was one of loss and love, of separation and reunion, of the incredible healing power of family. And it was only the beginning.